This presentation is being recorded and you are currently in listen-only mode. Now, without any further delay, I'd like to turn today's meeting over to our presenter, Eric Landis. Eric, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Jana. This is Eric Landis. I'm with AgileThought, and I am currently starting the sharing. Let me get this up. So let me give you a little background about AgileThought. We're a custom software development company, and I am part of the Agile practice. So as you would note by our name, we do things in Scrum and use Agile methods for developing software, and we like to help companies do that. So with that said, let's get on to our current presentation here. And I'm trying to get the slideshow started. Right. Okay, well. Okay. Well, my mouse appears to work. So anyway, today, sorry about that delay, with Tentacles everywhere, continuously deploying your product with TFS, using Octopus Deploy with TFS is the title, and I will be showing you really how to take that next step from doing builds and those kinds of things to using a tool called Octopus Deploy to kind of do your release management within the TFS family. And there will be demos. I'll be doing some talking, but it's mostly going to be demos and kind of going through how you set this up. Here we go. So the agenda today, I'm going to go through real quick TFS level set. Then we're going to kind of talk over build and deployments in the ALM and the application lifecycle management area. Then I'll be showing you doing a demo of a simple deployment with Octopus to one web server. In the middle of that, we'll kind of go over some of the tools I use, and then after that, kind of show you how you can deploy with Octopus to a service architecture. So with that being said, let's kind of level set on what I'm talking about when I say TFS, the ALM, application lifecycle management process, and what we're really talking about. If you've done any work with Microsoft, they have an ALM maturity model, and we've used this at our company to help other companies kind of understand the maturity of your ALM practice. And so as you'll see here, things like architecture and design, requirements engineering, user experience development, those are all categories that we would want to look at and see, what kind of maturity level you might have when we're talking about application lifecycle management. Other things like project management, governance, quality assurance, those are all part of it. But today we're specifically talking about software configuration management and deployment and operations. Those two kind of tie together with this Octopus Deploy, the release management. So that's really what we're talking about when I say TFS, ALM. Those are all part of it, and what we're kind of focusing in now, obviously, deployment and operations. You may have heard the term DevOps, and also some software configuration management would be in here as well. So let's talk about real quick, when I talk about build and deploy in TFS today, what am I talking about? I'm really talking about today TFS 2012 and Visual Studio 2012, and doing things like, obviously TFS has source control. It's got a requirements management tools to help you with your user stories if you're in an agile environment, with defects, test cases. Those are all part of TFS. On the build and deploy side, we are using things like continuous integration. So with continuous integration, when I talk about that, I'm saying when you check in your code, you immediately fire off a build that verifies that it at least compiles, and hopefully you're also at least running some automated unit tests, and I prefer TDD style unit tests that are small, following solid principles. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when I talk about continuous integration. There may be some deployments involved with continuous integration, but that's not really the main purpose of a CI build. The main purpose is to make sure that many team members can check in code and it's all compiling correctly and it can be deployed without any glaring major errors. The nightly builds then help your team. They will build and create kind of a stable deployment. And normally when we do nightly builds, we do a build and then we deploy to a development environment, and then any testers have some fairly stable code, at least for a day, so they can test completed stories and verify that those stories indeed don't have any defects. And that's kind of a normal enterprise style TFS type of environment. And as you'll see, if we do a deploy to development, we're in an enterprise environment. So I'm assuming an enterprise environment. There may be some other different types of environments that you have. I think with the information I give you, you can certainly adapt what we're talking about today to other environments, whether it's a consumer-facing website that's not necessarily enterprise, or to a even desktop development, which Octopus may be well suited for that as well, since it uses NuGet packages. But when we are talking about deploying in this environment, in an enterprise site environment, we have to do things. We're going to have at least these three environments. So we're going to have a development environment. We may promote it, I've called it user acceptance testing, or UAT environment, but perhaps you also have a QA environment, or those are the same. At some point you would promote it to prod. So I would think you're going to have at least three environments like this. You may have many more in an enterprise. And so when we're building and deploying in TFS, these are kind of the main points of the deployment that you want to get to. And right now, TFS, if you're in an enterprise shop, after deploying to development, you're most likely handing off deployment to system administrators that are not part of your development group. And if that's the case, that's where these last two, promoting to user acceptance testing and promoting to production, become quite difficult because it's not necessarily as repeatable and scalable of a solution to deploy with TFS as you might like. It could simply be just doing Xcopy, but a lot of times there's a lot more to it than that. And that's where a tool like a release management tool like Octopus can help out. So let's talk about deploying using Octopus and TFS. TFS 2012 really has no release management built into it. I will say that TFS 2013 is going to include InRelease, which is another release management software. So if you're going to that, that may be what you want to use. But for those of you who are in 2010 or 2012 or something earlier, Octopus may be a good answer for you. And utilizing Octopus, it's not an expensive option really. So you don't lose a lot of money if you eventually decide to go with the 2013 option, but you may find out you really like Octopus and you continue to use it once you get your release management built up, and you can start right now, obviously with Octopus or others, but we're going to concentrate on Octopus and how that can help you. One of the nice things about the Octopus deploy is it integrates well with TFS builds. There's an API that integrates with it, so you can call a lot of these things from a default template using MS build parameters in 2012. And that's one thing that makes it attractive. It's using NuGet packages to actually package up your solutions and do the deployments. Again, that's a nice feature, very open source. And Octopus has a lot of open source tools that'll help you, and I'll kind of mention those at some point here during the talk. But this integration really helps you with TFS, I think, and helps you create really good release management type solutions, a good release management solution. So now, having said that, I'm going to get right to the meat of this thing and really start showing you Octopus and how you can set this up, the first deployment. And we're going to look specifically at a web server with UI and an application on it. I'm going to assume one database server. I'm not really getting into database deployments at this point, but you certainly could do some database deployments using Octopus. One of the nice things is there's some good configuration management that integrates well with the Microsoft configurations, and that's where your connection strings and those kinds of things are automatically transformed when you do the deployments. So I'm going to come up here and kind of show you Octopus. So let's kind of start out with how do I get Octopus just up and running on a server, for instance. So what you would do is go to Octopus and download the Octopus server. And as you can see here, I'm kind of showing you that's the Octopus 1.6 blah 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 MSI. So I ran that. It's pretty straightforward installation. The other thing to be aware of with setting up Octopus is they have something called Tentacles, which every server that you want to deploy onto needs Tentacles installed, and I'll kind of show you, what that installation looks like, and show you also, how that's working here. Now, in this particular instance, I'm using a virtual machine, and I have both Tentacles and the server installed on this. In a lot of enterprise options, you might have Octopus installed on a server with Tentacles, but you'd have an application server or two with the Tentacles installation. You'd have another web server if you're load balancing with Tentacles installed, and those are all going to be deployable servers. And I'll show you how we make that manageable, because obviously if you have 3 environments and you have multiple servers per environment, how do I know where to deploy to? Well, we'll show you how that happens in the portal as we set that up. So as you notice, I've already installed Octopus onto this this server, and there's a website called Octopus Portal. So I can browse from here, or I'll just bring it up here, and I've obviously set some things up here. I'm ready to go. I've got something called Fabricom UI deployments using Brian Keller's awesome VMs to set this up. And as you'll see, there's projects, but let's go and look at the configuration just so you kind of know what to expect with Octopus. There's a couple of things that you will set up when you first do your installation. The first thing is there's going to, since, as I mentioned, Octopus uses NuGet packages to do the deployment. And because of that, we need to set up our own NuGet repository. So what I've done is I've set up a local NuGet feed here, and it's just a C drive, but you could set up a shared drive somewhere. Some people I know have been using, I think it's Orchard websites as their NuGet repository, so you certainly could do that on a web server somewhere. It's really up to you where you have your feed. The big thing is you want to be able to publish to that feed from wherever your build server is located, so make sure that's available. If you go to users, you've got some what do I want to say, you've got some permissions that you can set. You can set up groups, those kinds of things. Your retention, pretty simple, straightforward. Storage kind of shows how they do storage. They're using RavenDB. But they're really, well, you can set up an SMTP server, which I don't think I've done on this one. That's correct. But the really important thing here is the certificate. So when we set up Tentacles, these thumbprints are used for the tentacle to communicate with Octopus. So keep that in mind. That's what's going to happen as you're setting up your Tentacles and your server. So that's kind of the configuration. Most of it you need. Let's see, is this here? There's also a community license you can use, and that's free, and you have one project you can create on that. So kind of if you want to play around with it, that's very nice. The other thing is when we're using the API, you're going to need to know your there's an API key, and that's found under your profile. So when we come to the dashboard, if you were doing multiple deployments, you'd probably see a lot of these different names here. This one says Fabricom UI deployments, and you'll see something called dev here. What is dev? Well, dev is actually our environment. So let's go look at the environments I currently have set up. So I have one development environment set up, and that's one web server. So I could conceivably create more environments. So let me show you just real quick how I could do that. So we've got a QA environment. Why don't we add a production environment just to show you what that means. And under production environment, we're going to add a machine. And as you can see, I named the machine. So the machine is going to be, we'll just call it deploy external. And I need a thumbprint here, so you would put in the name, the IP address, or the server name, whatever makes you happy. And then you'd copy the thumbprint from the Tentacle and put that here. And as you can see, I'm not going to add that right now, but as you can see, if we look at the QA environment, the QA servers have these red exclamation points, and that means they haven't been able to communicate with that particular servers, those particular servers. That's a good way to check and know when your servers are up and running and able to receive your deployments. If you're doing a lot of deployments, that'll become very useful for you. So that's really how you set up environments, and those have to be set up before you can actually do deployments. So once we've set that up, then we get to the actual deployments, and we can create a new project. So let's go to projects. Same thing, I could create a new project, call it Eric's Test, whatever you want to call it. And there we go. That's under Fabricom deployments, right? So that's a new project. I can also add a project group. So right now I have Fabricom deployments, which has 2 projects under it. But I could also group, if I have different products, I would certainly create a project group for that. So if I have different products that are doing different deployments. So for instance, a good way I've found to do this is if I am deploying a data layer, and that is it's some kind of, let's say it's a RESTful API or something like that, and then I'm deploying some UI web projects that are different, I might separate those into 2 separate projects. So maybe Eric's Test, maybe I would call that something else. I would call that, Eric's UI, right? So there we go. All right, great. So Eric's Test, we don't care about that. Let's look at one I've already created. So this project is called Fabricom UI Deployment, and well, we have steps here, and you can do this in a new project or you can do it in an existing project. So if we look here, I've got deploy the internal UI, and what we're doing is we name it. We can figure out what repository we're going to use, so we could have multiple NuGet repositories to pull from if we needed to. And there's the NuGet package name. So I'll show you create new. How do you know that NuGet package name? I'll show you. It's kind of nice. And then we deploy to certain roles. In this case, I've created a role called UI Server, and that's the target I'm going to deploy to. When we install, this is the destination folder I want to install to, and the destination I want to delete all existing files before copying, and automatically update all those. So this is the step I'm creating, right? There's a lot of other information. So I create those steps, and I can have multiple steps in here. So for instance, I could add another step And we have a couple of options. We can deploy a NuGet package. We can deploy it over FTP. We can deploy it to Azure. Run a PowerShell script, and this is where you make it very extensible. If you have PowerShell scripts and you have some needs to implement some things before the actual deployment, so maybe you want to seed your database, then perhaps you do that through a PowerShell script. That's one way of doing it. And assuming you have SMTP set up, then you can send an email, which you probably want to do after a successful deployment. So if I'm automating this after a successful deployment, I want to get an email. And there's a manual intervention step required. So if you require approval from a certain group, you can actually have that happen in this deployment. So those are the steps you have when you create a project. So now we get to the variables, and variables can be very important depending on your scenario. So for this particular scenario, it's pretty easy. As you can see, I've actually set up the variables so that we know the package directory path and what value that is. Now, I set that earlier, but I just want to be on the safe side, and I wanted to kind of show you how this works. And then we can also set the Octopus website name. So I'm going to go into Edit Variables to show you what happens. So let's say we want to deploy this not just to dev but to QA. Then I would add a name for QA. So we do Octopus, and it nicely has some things come up for us. And then I'm going to type in, C:\website, maybe, just making this up. And I could say I want to go to QA, and I can select a server that's in QA. Maybe it's the UI server. And as you'll notice in this drop down, it shows you what servers are available in your different environments. And so that's probably something we should touch on, is how did we get this web server name and this DI web server? How is that showing up here? And then we can say deploy this, right? So I'm going to cancel here. We're not going to add that yet. And let's go back to environments, because I do want to touch on this real quickly. If you'll notice, we have a web server, we have a name, and the role is a UI server, and the environment is dev. So dev, it's pretty obvious where that comes from, but where do these roles come from? That was a little confusing to me when I first started with Octopus. And here's the thing, that these roles are whatever you make them, and you create them here. So I could also give it a role of, dev UI web server. Okay, so now we have this role of dev UI web server, and let me just set that. And now if I click into here, I can see we've added that dev UI web server. So this is how you classify your environments, and I'm going to come here and get rid of this. So I just exit out, save it. But this is how you can add roles, and roles really help you, I've found, when I'm creating when I'm doing variables in my project. So you'll notice here when we went to edit, I have a UI server with 3 machines. Well, those machines span from QA to dev. So the issue there is that now when I create a variable, I have to create a variable for each web server machine. So it's really, I found it's much better to try and keep those roles, at least in my experience so far, to keep those to something that is in your particular environment. So as you can see here, we've got our environment dev, we've got the UI server here, and the web server. So that should make sense. That should deploy fairly well there. So now we've got this project set up. Let's think about now how am I going to deploy this? We've got it all set up. As you can see, when we go to the projects and we look at these, I've had a lot of successful deployments. So once I have my first successful deployment, and I want to promote it, assuming I've got it set up here. Oh, oops, I hit dev. Let's go to this deployment. Now, once it's successful and I get sign off from whoever I need to get sign off to, I could actually promote this to another one. And I forgot to put my license in, which I actually have one, to show you this. So, but when you promote it to, it's going to show you the QA environment, and you deploy it, and it really goes through kind of the same output that you have in your dev environment, and it'll show you if your errors. It'll turn red if there's errors, and you can fix them. So that's really how you get Octopus set up, and it's taken me a lot less time than it might take you to set up the Tentacles on the different servers and stuff, depending on how many you have. But once you get that set up, now you're ready to deploy. And so let's go through a simple deployment, and in this deployment, we're going to do it fairly manually, in that we're going to call a build, and it's going to create the NuGet packages. So just a word for you on NuGet packages. I had struggled a bit with creating NuGet packages when I first started using Octopus, and have found different ways to create the NuGet package. I will give you my tips on how to do that. But really what you need to do is kind of experiment with it. Just get started and start creating them. So to create the NuGet package, one of the things I've done first is created a new spec file. Okay, and in this file, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. But in this particular file, what I've done is, I have the ID. This is what it's going to say when we look at the file. When the file's created, it's going to be fiber.web version number.nuget, or new package, sorry. And then we've got a title, and you'll see here I've got a version number substituting, and version numbering can be very important. With this particular one, I'm using kind of the automated Visual Studio version number. So it's taking that version number from the assembly. So if we look at, here's the assembly info. I'm saying 1.0.0. So when we build, it's automatically incrementing with I think it's using the date and time to seed that number at the end. You can certainly use any numbering scheme you like. This is the most automated way that I have so far. You can also check out TFS NuGetter. That's on Codeplex. That I haven't done a lot with, but I do know it's supposed to be a TFS build template that helps version your NuGet packages and help you create them through TFS build. So that might be something to look into. So as you can see, there's a lot more information, license URL, ownership. That's all kind of legal type stuff that you need in your NuGet package. And that's your metadata. You can omit the files section or include them. So in this particular case, this particular application needs all of these files. So that's what we're trying to create here, right? So let's see, and I think I actually forgot one file. Here we go. So I was running a test. I've been running a little late today. So let's put this. Yeah, this will be good. We don't have pages. Yeah. So let's go here. So I want to include that test HTML right there. So the way I should be able to do that is just add file source equals test.html. Oops. And I added a quote when I shouldn't. And the target equals. Added that. And all right. Yeah. So that should be good. So when we create our NuGet package, and I'm going to check this in, and This is added test file to NuGet package. Let me check that in. Oh, no, 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 no. Another gotcha, these Octopus README files are actually not needed, but they do get deployed, and I just haven't had time to remove them from my solution. But you definitely don't need those. Those just get installed because of the NuGet package restrictions. Cool. So I've checked that in. So let's look at now we want to create the NuGet package from our solution, right? One tool I found very helpful is something called Octopack, and it's an open source tool that is intended for Octopus. And what it does is it helps you package up your solutions into NuGet files, and it does that via being a NuGet package itself. So let me show you the way you would install that, and I've already have it installed. But to install Octopack, you simply have to go to the Package Manager console, say install package Octopack. If I hit enter, it should say it's already installed. Yeah, it already has it. So it's all good. But once you do that, if you don't, it will add Octopack to that. And here's the part that you need to know about if you like me have multiple projects that need to be NuGet files. I think a lot of times they assume you're going to have one solution, and in that solution you'll have one NuGet package out of that solution. But you can kind of get around that, and I don't know if get around is the right term. Maybe that's not exactly what was intended. But I went and I unloaded my web project, and I want to edit the csproj file. And if we look at the bottom of this file, we can see what happened is we're importing packages Octopack targets. So now when we build this, now using MS Build and not building here in Visual Studio, there are tricks to doing it when you build in Visual Studio, but out of the box, what you have to do, so we would run this, as you'll see, there's an MS Build command, and I'm building the call center solution, and I've got two commands here. /p run Octopack equals true, and /p Octopack package publish to file share equals C NuGet feed, and that's my NuGet feed. So if I hit enter there, that actually packages everything up and should create the new file. So if we go and look here, this is doing it manually on your from the command line. And normally what we'll do is we're going to do that through the build, but I wanted to show you these commands so that you understand where this is coming from. So we've actually created Octopack, a package through Octopack, and here's my NuGet. Oh, wrong one. Clicked in the wrong spot. Here's my NuGet feed, and we're looking for the web file, and there we go. We just created this fiber web package. I'm trying to minimize that, but so now that you know we're using Octopack, let's look under packages. So a lot of times I don't know how other people do this, but we may not use NuGet in our solutions to always download packages because we want to keep a certain version. We don't want NuGet always updating our versions in an enterprise situation. So we'll create a library file off of your developer's main here, so like this library, and then we would copy that Octopus to library, and that's where we would keep everything. One of the things you should be aware is if you're doing that, make sure you copy all of it, because targets need all of these. The NuGet exe targets path, it needs the Octopack targets, obviously, and the DLL. So just a word to the wise, that's what we've done. So you can go into that CSproj file, modify that import to point to the library rather than the NuGet packages file, and in that way you can keep control of your versions of that if that's what you choose to do. So hopefully that makes sense. So now I've shown you how you can create those NuGet files that are going to get deployed via Octopus. So how do we do that through TFS? So we've done that manually through Visual Studio. Now we're going to do this in TFS, and how do we do it? And they've made it quite simple, actually. Let me see. I don't think I've got that open, so let me go to the build using Octopus and ignore the orange signs there. That's we've got a unit test. It's not passing, so I do need to get on that, I suppose, but since it's a demo, I don't know how much effort I'll put into that. Great. So as you can see, I'm using just the default template here, and coming in to edit the process the template, and we've called it Nightly Fabricom Dev using Octopus. And really, all we have to do here is just add those /p options that we used right here on our DOS command, right? So I really just copied it from this DOS command, which is doing an MS build of the solution. Here, where I'm doing the MS build arguments, I'm just copying run octopack equals true and publishing to the NuGet feed. So once we run that build, you know, we would see it build and deploy to that NuGet feed. So that's really all you have to do utilizing Octopack. Now keep in mind there are some limitations with Octopack. Like I said, it's assuming a lot about your solution. So for instance, if you want to, let's say you would have multiple new spec files, you know, that might not work out well. If you have, you know, for one solution, which I've done before, so you have to think of a different solution or create your own. So I've also created my own NuGet packages using a post-build event when Octopack doesn't work. So if you need more flexibility, you can use the post-build event to you know, create your NuGet package directly using NuGet exe. So in doing that, I would have to modify a template, perhaps, and have a process that would do that. Or I'm sorry, that I would modify the post-build event, say here under properties or just in the CSproj, and you know, NuGet.exe pack, you know, the web file, you know, Fabricom web, and give it the new spec file name, and it would create it. So I'm not going to save that, but that gives you an idea. That's not exactly the syntax, but if you go to the NuGet documentation library, you can find out what the exact syntax is. But you're going to pack your pack those projects based on your new spec file, and if your new spec file is named the same as CSproj, then you can also still use that automatic versioning. Otherwise, you might have to manually do the versioning or do it in some other fashion. Again, this is something where you might want to look to that TFS NuGetter, see if that might work for you, because that is supposed to handle a lot of that information. So great. So now we've run it. We've got those packages out there. So how are we going to deploy to our new dev server? So I am going to go here. So we've got everything created, right? We're ready to go. So I want to create a release. Oh, hold on. My bad. It's creating that project. Let's go to Eric's tests. I want to disable that. Let's disable. There we go. Sorry about that. That's what happens when you do these things on the fly, I guess. Let me go to my settings. Can we? Okay, this is enable. All right, great. So now I can create a release. Well, that one's okay. We should see. Is that the latest? I may be wrong. I thought that was not the latest. So excuse me while I make sure this is the latest. Yeah, I thought it was this one. All right, so hopefully it'll show me. There it is. We want this particular one because we just created it. And we will give it a version number. The release will be the same version number as that particular one. And release notes, here you could say includes user stories 1, 2, and 3, something like that. Hopefully you have maybe a more an easier way to do that instead of from memory, maybe copy and paste from somewhere. So we've created the package. Nice. Now I can deploy this release. And this one I want to deploy to our development environment. I want to force this to be reinstalled on Tentacles. And I have the option of skipping. I'm going to skip extranet because we really aren't going to look at that. And new release comment or something that affects something intelligent. So we deploy the release, and now you'll see, hopefully, it will work as planned. And there we go. The deployment is complete. If you're curious as to what happens in these deployments, you actually can expand this to see what's going on. So this is real helpful if you're troubleshooting a deployment issue. You know, where did it deploy to? So this gives you all that good information. If you'll see here, it says it's purging the directory of Fabricom Web, and it's now extracting the contents. So it's doing exactly what we wanted to. Everything's green. Now we should be able to go to our site and check it out. And really, that's the simple deployment going to a simple website. So that's the first part of what we wanted to go over. As we talked about that, here's kind of a listing of a lot of the tools that I found you will need when we do an Octopus deploy. Obviously, we need Octopus Deploy, that server, and the Tentacles package that comes with it. So when you go there, you'll see there are those two downloads. Of course, we're using TFS, and this is 2012. You can also use it with 2010. I haven't tried any version previous to that, so I would imagine you could, but I don't know that for sure. Octopack is part of Octopus Deploy's open source there, and I have that the listing for it. And Octopack will help you create your NuGet packages pretty much on the fly. And if your websites and services are fairly standard, Octopack is going to work well for you. So I would recommend you look at that. You may want to start thinking about maybe nesting solutions within a solution so that for deployment purposes you can keep things separated for your NuGet packages. But it's up to you. But I would recommend thinking about that. Oh, another one that I didn't talk about. So if we look here, I want to know what's in my NuGet package that we just created, right? So let me close this. So you probably saw in my NuGet feed, it has kind of a little icon here. I'm using NuGet Package Explorer. If you're not familiar with it, I recommend you look at that. And this allows you to see what's in your package without what's in your NuGet package without really having to deploy it and even view some things. So if, let's say, you want to know configurations, or here's a web config, I want to view that. Well, it gives you the option to view some of the files. So it's really a helpful utility as you're starting out and troubleshooting. And I'm sure in the future when you deploy and somebody says, well, the configuration is wrong, you can go back to your NuGet package and make all the files are there using Package Explorer. It's really good for troubleshooting. So another tool is OctoEXE. We really didn't talk about this, but that option, this is the API tool that allows you on a TFS build server to call the Octopus API very easily and integrate it with your build. So if I'm doing this, let me show you from a web page shot where we have that. Oops. Oh, I don't have that up here. Shoot. Really, you're going to use a command like octo, octo space create release. If you look at this tools, it will give you some command line options that you can use in your build server. So you would need to install OctoEXE on your build server, and then it should be able to communicate because you're going to give it an HTTP address of the Octopus server to call, and it will call it and create releases. It also needs your, I think I mentioned this earlier, your web API key, and then you get that from your configuration right here on Octopus. So if I go here and go to my profile, I should see my API key somewhere. There we go. And you do need that to actually access the API from Octo. So again, that's a tool highly recommend you look into if you want to automate everything from your build. If you want to have that manual step in between, it's not a lot of work, but a lot of times on especially your development of deployments, you may want to automate that, and you may not want to automate it for your QA type deployments or anything past your development environment. Oh, I have a thank you, but I'm not done yet. We need to look at how do we deploy to these bigger environments, right? So I talked about that a little bit, and really what we do. So as you see, since this is a demo, I don't have an actual QA environment up and running, but this gives you an idea of the types of servers you might have. So depending on how scalable you're trying to make your application, you may have some web services servers, and you may have some web servers. In this case, we're saying extranet web servers. We don't really have a services, but if I were doing it, I'd probably have what I'd call a UI or web server front end, and then I'd have a services front end, right? And so, and then if we're load balancing those servers, we want to deploy to, all the servers that are in that load balancing equation. So if we have 3 servers that are being load balanced for our web server, we would have 3 UI servers here in QA. And where this becomes important, so now we go to projects, and if we want to deploy to QA, we may need to set some variables up, like I mentioned before, for the QA environment. So now the QA directory path is different than the directory path, let's say, in the dev environment. So we actually just call it the website, because this is the only server in QA that we have. So we would say it's the QA server, and we should just be able to say it's a UI server, and this is for the internal UI. Okay, and then we would add another variable, and this would be the website name, and we don't necessarily have to do this. Again, I just do it just to be sure, and we would call it fabricamfiber.web, and it's QA, and it's our UI servers, and we deploy here. And we save. And we do the same thing for our services or whatever. Oh, the other the other thing you can do with variables, so let's go in here. Let's say you have some configuration strings you need to change. You know, let's see what we've got here. We don't have any here, but if you had a configuration string set up in your web config, it would pull that up, the name. So if we had a configuration string of you know, user entities or something like that, let's say, you could actually type in now the configuration string. So, you know, data source, I forget the exact syntax, but data source equals, right? And this would happen in QA, and it would transform that user entity's configuration into this data source for you automatically on the fly. So the other way that happens, the configurations, is if you're using kind of the standard Microsoft method of creating releases. So if we look here, you know, I have a QA release and debug release, and if I look at my web config, I've got a QA config, so I could certainly come in here, you know, add my configuration, you know, just like we normally do it. So we replace the string, the connection string, in the web.qa.config file, and Octopus doesn't have to be told about that. As long as you include the web.qa config in your NuGet package and you name the environment QA, Octopus will say when you deploy to QA, oh, I found this config, and now it's time to change it, and it will do the transformations, much like you see happening if you're using the web deploy in Visual Studio. So that's probably the best way if you're using standard configuration files to do this. Now, Octopus can also do other XML transformations if you'd like. You just need to set it up in kind of a standard fashion. So if you have other ways of doing that, you certainly want to look to that. Probably one of the hardest transformations we've found is in JavaScript, and right now, you know, if we're doing any kind of configuration settings in a JavaScript file, it's not really intuitive as to how to do that. There's a lot of ways you can do it. You can, you know, copy over files with environment settings, those kinds of things, but it all involves you doing something outside of the normal environment. So there's not really a good solution that I know of in Octopus for that right now, other than if you can somehow use XML and transform it and get it to your JavaScript. So that's just a caveat there for anybody having that. So let's get back to our deployment. So we have set up all our variables. We go back to our project, and, you know, like I said, pretty simple. We go to this release. We feel like we're ready, and we can now promote it to QA, and it'll do all the good stuff that we want it to. Great. So really, that's kind of a beginning overview of what we've got with Octopus Deploy. There's certainly a lot more that we could do here, and but this kind of gives you an introduction to what Octopus Deploy and TFS can do together to kind of help you manage your release management in TFS 2012 and 2010. At this point, we're pretty much ready. I don't know if there are any questions or anything, but that's pretty much all I had. Jana, I don't know if we have any questions now.
Thanks, Eric. There's no questions in the IM window, but if you're in the audience and you have a question for Eric, please feel free to put it in the IM window. And Eric, I'm going to take over the presentation area, so you might want to also put your email address in the IM window in case someone would like to contact you.
Okay, sure. I will do that.
I'm going to put up the first of 4 quick poll questions. If you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to answer these questions, we'd sure appreciate it. And as a reminder, you can request a copy of the slides directly from our presenter today. There you go, in the IM window or through his email address at AgileThought, which is now in the IM window. And I'd like to thank Microsoft partner AgileThought and speaker Eric Landez for their presentation today. AgileThought presents with Tentacles Everywhere, continuously deploying your product with TFS.
You're welcome.
And the last bit, with that, ladies and gentlemen, it does conclude today's online meeting. Thanks for joining us. And once you finish the poll, you may now disconnect. But Eric, if you want to stay on the line for a couple minutes, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the IM window. Otherwise, everyone have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.